Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, depending upon where you are. Thank you for joining today's education session focused on how you can make your organizations more efficient by gaining visibility into JDE supply chain data with Power BI. Before we jump in, I had just a couple housekeeping items to discuss. So we will keep some time at the end of the presentations for questions. So if you have questions throughout today's presentation, please put them down in the Q&A panel and we'll make sure to address those at the end. And we will also be making this recording available to you after the session. So if you'd like to reference it again or share it with your colleagues, you'll be able to do that. So with that, I'll go ahead and introduce myself and Todd. So my name is David Kettinger, and I lead the marketing team here at Preferred Strategies. And today I have the privilege of introducing Todd Wilson, who is the CEO of Preferred Strategies. And he'll be leading us through this supply chain journey, as well as sharing some of his own experiences. Over the past year, I've learned a lot from Todd, so I'm excited to have him here today to talk about his experiences working with manufacturing companies like Cliff Bar and Kids 2, and how they were able to use analytics to improve their supply chain processes. So with that, Todd, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, David, and thanks to everyone who joined today. It's really a pleasure to share some of our experience and also talk a little bit about what we're doing in terms of development around specific solutions. In this case, your entire visibility across supply and demand in a JD Edwards world. By way of introduction, David mentioned briefly my current role at Preferred. I've been in this role for a little over a year, but long connection with Preferred and the team. Prior to that, I had the privilege of being an advisory board member, and prior to that, spent several years as a customer. During that time, I was the CIO at Cliff Bar and Company, and I'll talk a little bit about that experience because that led to much of the supply and demand focus and innovation that we've tried to bring to our customers. After spending several years at Cliff Bar, I also had the chance to spend about 2.5 years running the Asia Pacific operations for a manufacturing company called Kids 2, and learned quite a bit from that experience as well. So I'm excited to share that today, and I want to especially thank you, everyone, for joining. Just my quick agenda. We've talked a little bit about introductions. I'll also spend a minute introducing you to Preferred Strategies if you're not familiar with our organization, as well as our flagship product, Quick Launch. We'll talk a little bit about why supply and demand is so hard, especially in a JD Edwards environment. What's unique about that, what makes it so difficult, especially as it relates to other data sources that might be needed to really give you that holistic view of your entire supply chain. And then we'll talk a little bit about my experience and highlight a couple of learnings and examples of what that can look like to modernize your supply and demand. First, around availability and having visibility across your entire chain. We'll look at the advantages of that and how that can be possible, but also how to optimize, not just how you can get that end-to-end visibility, but also what does that look like to optimize your entire supply chain. We will spend a few minutes on a live demonstration just so you can get a sense for the Quick Launch product and how it fits into meeting these demands around modernizing supply and demand. And that should leave us some time for questions. And if you do have questions, as David said, we'll definitely jump in and answer those where they arise, but also have plenty of time at the end to answer any questions. So just a quick note around our organization. Preferred Strategies has been around for over 20 years. In many ways, right now, we operate like a startup. We're very innovative, trying to continue to innovate, and a heavy focus on innovating around analytics and enterprise analytics is our core focus, specifically how that can really bring new value to JD Edwards environments. Preferred is also an ESOP company. We have employee ownership and a values-driven company. So we really do care about our people. We really care about our customers and care about bringing the best product to market. So that's just a quick note. Significant amount of experience in the JD Edwards space and in the analytics space, and trying to really work with customers to be that trusted partner in everything that is analytics. The product itself, Quick Launch, we have our Quick Launch for JD Edwards product, which is a modern enterprise analytics platform. It will connect and bring together all of the different data sources, starting with your JD Edwards environment. So a complete automated workflow process where it also can include other significant data sources that are critical. When we talk about supply and demand, that is almost always the case. It's not just JD Edwards. It's other data sources that come into play and create a real meaningful value if we can automate that pipeline. We're then transforming that and organizing that into a single source of information. This blue cube you see is where we are trying to organize through tens of thousands of hours of work to properly map and transform into a conformed, governed, secure, and high-performing data model so that you have the right kind of capability in your analytics solution. We also integrate that into Power BI as our analytics platform of choice. Lots we could say about why that is, but they continue to be at the forefront of what's possible around the analytics world, and we want to continue to leverage that. So ultimately, we're trying to bring the right information to the right people and do so at the right time. Okay, so that's a quick overview of what our Quick Launch solution provides. Now on to supply chain. So supply chains are complicated. No doubt everybody knows that as well or better than I do. And it involves a lot of moving parts. All of us on this call are no doubt involved in some way, whether we're supporting one of these processes. Maybe you're responsible for most or all of these processes. But it really is the backbone of any manufacturing industry. It really is the backbone that almost crosses the border into a competitive advantage. In fact, during the COVID period of disruption through supply chain, it was never more important to be especially proficient in everything that you do around supply and demand. So that amplified what was already the case. It is a challenging world, and that is exacerbated by a JD Edwards environment. No doubt other ERP systems face similar challenges. But when we look at what that looks like from a JD Edwards perspective, it's complicated because we've got several different sources within JD Edwards, whether that's inventory and everything related, safety stock, sales orders, our POs and work orders. The list goes on and on. The way we might be structured in terms of branch plants, the way we might bring in external data as well, the time frame elements. How do we match those? Is there a lag time we need to account for? From the JD Edwards environment alone, we've listed just a handful of the sources that may come into play when you're talking about visibility across your supply and demand ecosystem. So inventory, work orders, your sales forecast, your demand planning, your capacity planning, your production planning, your card decks, and everything related to that ecosystem. So when it comes to trying to bring that all together, what we've tried to do is twofold. One, provide a forward way to amalgamate the different data sources that are key, whether it's through JD Edwards or outside of JD Edwards as well, and create a single point of visibility across all of that environment so that you can see and proactively manage whether that's just the instant availability and visibility, or trying to use that to the next step with more advanced analytics and trying to predict and optimize. So how does that work now? The reality is, in a JD Edwards environment, you're typically going to have to work through multiple screens, right? You have your work orders in one screen. You have your POs in another screen. Trying to come up with your time series, you're going to a different part of JD Edwards, and so often that's got limitations as well. We've got limitations based on the item. Is it a single item that you want to look at, or is it holistic? More importantly, how do we anticipate the problems and manage by exception rather than going through each one of those items? But it's not just at the item level. If you think about the item branch combinations, that also adds to the list, whether that's distribution, multiple distribution for the same item, multiple production for the same item, multiple sourcing for the same item, trying to bring all that together into a single place rather than having the multiple application windows that you would need to support that in JD Edwards alone. Then if you add to that separate sources of data, maybe you've added a bolt-on system for various purposes. Maybe that includes a demand planning system that's outside of JD Edwards, a forecasting tool of some kind, a customer analytics solution that's outside of your CRM system, for example. That can all be outside of JD Edwards, all critical data points that we want to pull together. And to do so now, what is the typical process, right? I mean, I think we all know and love the single tool of choice. Just a quick nod to that, and also to the series, the Office. If we could just stop using Excel to run our supply chain, it is the hammer that pounds every nail, and whether it should or shouldn't, and creates all kinds of challenges despite the capability. But if you think about what that means today, how that requires a lot of manual effort, even if some of those feeds are semi-automated, it becomes more error prone, more difficult to maintain. The more it grows through macros, through hidden tabs, through the lookups that are outside of your conformed dimensions of a proper data model, the more that happens, the more unwieldy it becomes, the more inefficient it becomes. Even though you can do just about anything that you can think of in Excel, that doesn't mean it's something that is sustainable, especially as we add additional data sources to that. Now, it probably goes without saying, but when we think about, why does this matter, it really adds to the bottom line. Here's just a couple of references, a quick Google search, and you'll find thousands of references. Supply chain optimization is really a huge first step, according to this first reference, Allied Market Search research, to having just simple visibility, where you can really see what's happening from end to end. 6% of companies reported that they have that. That's a pretty small number when you think about the importance of having that visibility. Probably even more telling is the second, which is a supply chain study, worldwide study, that reducing supply chain costs from 9% to 4% can double your profits. Now, that's going to be unique to every organization, but that's certainly in line with what our customers have seen in discovering what that improved supply chain visibility can mean, how that improves their overall optimization of data strategy, not to mention what that can mean to the bottom line for their supply chain. And the good news is that data strategy, that improvement of data strategy across our supply chain and outside of our supply chain really does drive those actual financial results. Okay, so I mentioned already in the introduction, my experience over the last couple of decades has been specifically in manufacturing prior to joining Preferred Strategies. And a lot of that started with Cliff Bar and Company. If you're not familiar with Cliff Bar, it's a health and nutrition energy bar maker. And during my time, early on in my time at Cliff Bar, we went into the world of manufacturing, self-manufacturing. We had always used co-packers before that. So we suddenly had a tremendous amount of data coming from a long list of sources. We're stepping into something that was new across the board, even though we had certainly brought on resources that had plenty of experiences. But we wanted to really make sure that we were taking the right steps and optimizing for the future. So when we started looking at our end-to-end supply chain and our manufacturing process that was really critical in the middle of that, we had a lot of challenges. And hopefully you're seeing the video that is coming across now. I do see there's a message that internet connection is unstable. So apologize if that video is not coming across clear. Hopefully that will in the recording if you want to go back and see it. But this end-to-end process was capturing 20,000 data tags through the equipment that we now were using for our production line. It was data coming from PLCs and the robotics and the packaging equipment. The data was just a flood of data, and we had no way of really collecting all that and trying to match it to what we had in our JD Edwards system. So JD Edwards was deriving most of that from work orders, our demand planning, our supply planning. That was all driven through our JD Edwards environment. But to take that and match that and have good visibility, it was a tedious and manual process. That process meant that we were collecting data, trying to upload that into spreadsheets, trying to analyze that, and then we'd eventually end up publishing that, usually in the form of whiteboards on the next shift. So the opening shift would show us what just happened in the previous shift. We didn't have visibility into that in real time. So we were really trying to solve for a handful of big problems in this entire process. The video shows the manufacturing process, but it started much earlier in that chain and continued much further than just that finished goods inventory. We had no visibility in that entire process other than to go to different sources and try to collect that data, pull it into a spreadsheet and try to analyze it. As I mentioned, we had thousands, in fact, it was tens of thousands of data points, trying to collect that data in a meaningful way. And it was multiple sources. We think about JD Edwards as the starting point, and it really was the source of record, not just for transactions, but also for our dimensions. So our item master was the source of truth for everything about each one of our products. So those dimensions then became the referential integrity for our production system, for our quality system, for our warehousing system. But we also had data coming from those different sources, whether it was barcode scanning and data collection, whether it was quality information, our production stats, whether it was through a PLC or a photo eye. We were trying to collect all that data. And so we had multiple data sources to collect. Same's true about the rest of our supply chain. So we ended up moving to a third-party demand planning system. We needed to integrate that data. We ended up then adding a consumer complaints system on the front end. We want to integrate that back into a lock code level of information. So we had complete visibility from the very start to the very finish of the entire supply chain. And so we were trying to collect all of that data. And then we were trying to also really figure out what's our data-driven philosophy? Are we just trying to put a stopgap solution in place so that we have something that's slightly better than a spreadsheet? In fact, that really led us down a path of determining what we really wanted to do is make our data-driven capability a core competitive advantage for us as an organization. And as it turns out, we started with manufacturing. Probably not the typical place you would start when you think about data-driven capabilities. But for us, it was the most logical. We were new to manufacturing. We had more data that we knew what to do with. And that data became critical to us in terms of making really good decisions. So along that journey, we ended up putting in place the collection of all that data and really worked hard to integrate that into a holistic solution. It aligned to our specific strategy as an organization. So not just the data strategy, but our organizational strategy. It's really important that that become aligned to that because we wanted to make sure we were building that long-term competency, not just an isolated capability in a particular area. So that was propagated across all areas. On the manufacturing floor, that meant from start to finish, we ended up with real-time data we were collecting and monitoring, whether that was production information. And up to that point, we didn't know until the next day if we had made too much or too little of any particular work order run. Now we were able to see that in real time. Now we were able to have shop floor decisions where we saw what was happening in real time. Same true on our quality. We were able to see that in advance and take proactive steps to be able to manage that rather than the next day seeing that we had quality deviations and ended up breaking thresholds on our upper or lower limits and having to put holds in place. We suddenly became proactive and were able to manage that right up front. It also gave visibility not just on the shop floor, but through the rest of the organization. Our headquarters teams were able to see what was happening at any time. They were able to see what was happening by line, by flavor, by production run, and be able to correlate that to the decisions they were making, whether that was trying to effectively manage a time series or even provide some sort of customer update on availability of product. We were able to make that information available across the organization. So it also was a process of not just integrating those data sources, but automating that as well. And that's a deep dive that would take quite a bit of time to talk through all the moving parts across that journey to integrate and automate. But as soon as we started automating that information, we had a wealth of information right in front of us, available to the right people at the right time. We did have to make sure that we were not seeing unintended consequences. It was a behavioral change. It was a mindset change across our organization. If you think about being on the shop floor and having no idea until the next day whether or not you won or lost the day in terms of production, now all of a sudden you can see that start to turn yellow. We don't want to sacrifice the quality of the product or the safety of our team, certainly not the safety, for the expense of trying to make up some time on a production number. So we had to be really deliberate and careful about the change management process. But ultimately, that was certainly worth the effort because we suddenly had empowered shop floor decision makers that were able to make real-time decisions along the way. Last thing I would say in terms of what made that most successful is that we really never stopped innovating. We were all aligned that we wanted this to be a core competency that gave us a competitive advantage. So we continue to innovate. We continue to get feedback. Many times it was with very surprising input that had a significant impact. And that was only possible because the right people who had the right kind of understanding of what was actually happening at that workstation, that was really the input that was never possible to capture before. Even with the best continuous improvement kind of processes, we now had data to better empower, and that created a whole new level of understanding and therefore innovation and improvement with optimization and predictability that we had never been able to achieve before. So ultimately, this resulted in quite a lot of advantages for us in this example. Real data-driven results. So our production increased significantly. The cost of that also significantly reduced at the same time. The quality increased. We were able to be more proactive. We we had suddenly the capability to understand our on time and in full before it became a problem. Same is true with downtime. Our downtime and OEE overall significantly increased. We reduced our waste, improved inventory, supplier relationships, our demand planning MAPE scores and accuracy improved, traceability, even the overall network optimization. So ultimately, we ended up seeing a number of areas where we could quantify the value of what that meant. And sometimes that was in terms of dollars. Sometimes it was in terms of satisfaction, whether it was team members that were much more engaged now, or customers that were ultimately happier with the results that they were getting, even consumers, as that translated into better meeting and understanding the need of those consumers. So in the end, to kind of summarize that, we created that solid foundation. So that meant starting with JD Edwards as the source of record for transactional activity, began to combine that with other sources of data, from demand planning to manufacturing to customer sentiments. All of that became a key part of what we wanted to identify as key data sources. That made it possible once we had that integrated and automated. And that was a series of steps. Didn't all happen overnight. We took steps to deliberately focus on key areas and build from there, and then continue to innovate. But it made it possible for us to focus on what matters. Instead of a reactive mode where we're simply trying to get that spreadsheet together and pull together the right information so that we can get the report out, we had all that mostly or fully automated. So then we were able to really focus on what matters. And then we began to prioritize based on an exception-based view of the world. We could have huddles on the shop floor to see what was happening. You see an example here in this photo, not just the real-time monitor that was in key locations, but also the periodic huddles where we'd not only, and you see a tablet example here, not only see the exception-driven indicators, but then be able to drill down into that and understand the underlying detail of that, and do so with the right people involved so that they can make really good informed decisions on their respective areas. Same is true from the beginning of the supply chain to the end of the supply chain. It also created not just the real-time aspect of it, but it created this democratization of information. Many white papers out there about the values of democratizing your data. We saw it firsthand, just how valuable that was to democratize that, to make it available to really across the organization and receive the kind of input that made us better. And ultimately, that meant our data-driven strategy became a competitive advantage that we wanted to continue to innovate and mature over time. So from a high level, I think the first example here is to really think about what does that mean as a holistic view of my supply chain, a holistic end-to-end view. And that means being able to see and monitor your availability across all data points. You see here just more of a high level look at that, where we were pulling all data into one spot, from demand data, supply planning, time series data, production data of all sorts, inventory data, and finished goods components, on hold, whatever the key attributes that were important for us to understand visibility across our entire supply chain were accessible all in one place. Sales detail and the related forecast, what did that look like? That got us into understanding allocations, understanding customer demand by customer group. We had key customers that we had contractual obligations to fulfill. What did that look like? What does that mean in terms of on time and in full? And then even down the line further with customer data and consumer data, the ability to take a lock code and have instant access to look at that consumer complaint as an example, see that come in and say, Where did that originate? What lot is that? What shift produced that lot? What line produced that lot? What branch produced that lot? What are the warehouse details? Was that lot on hold at any point? The logistics providers involved really see like every bit of detail from a holistic view all in one place. And the ability to see that and monitor that across all data points makes it possible to ask questions that would be much harder to answer, certainly take much longer. When will be short on inventory? What SKUs or item numbers will that specifically occur? What's the cause of that shortage? Same with excess inventory. In fact, one of the biggest cost savings you can realize here is to reduce that excess inventory and see that in real time with some predictable and proactive capability that's not possible with a spreadsheet-driven way of analyzing data, or certainly not easy. Am I over-allocated? If so, how do I prioritize and manage that? So a number of different advantages that are probably obvious, but when you bring that information together, it is a whole nother world in terms of what you're able to make decisions on and do so in a very quick time frame. The other area is around optimizing that. And when we think about optimizing that data, I'll focus just in this case specifically around manufacturing, since we just saw an example of some of that process in manufacturing. But think about what that looks like if you have real-time or near real-time visibility to bring all those data areas together, your production planning, how that translated into your capacity plan. What does that mean in terms of labor, shift hours as well as dollars? What does that mean in terms of the quality data, the production data that you're able to see now all in one place, integrated and conformed all to the same data model, and do so in real time. Same's true for all of your inventory visibility. So bringing that together, amalgamating all those data sources, it makes it possible then to take the next steps to optimize that process. So with current information from all of these sources, you can be proactive in adjusting your production plan to meet current and real-time demand. You can adjust your capacity planning. That'll improve your OEE. That'll reduce your waste and presumably reduce your costs as it correlates to each one of those improvements. With current information from all data sources, you can better anticipate those problems, whether that's like the example I mentioned before, where you're monitoring SPC charts in real time, identifying those deviations before they become quality issues. Saves a significant amount of time and cost if you can see that in advance. Sometimes that the value is through the most unlikely outcomes, the things you never would have expected. One of the things we learned in analyzing the data in our manufacturing process at Clif Bar had to do with the extruder speed. So the extruder, we'd have dough for our nutritional bars being extruded with a bar cut that was at a certain interval. Well, it turns out that we were able to increase production and reduce cost by reducing the speed of that extruder cut. Once we reduced that, we ended up with less downtime, better predictability on maintenance, and ultimately saved a ton of money and time in terms of downtime to be able to improve our overall process. We would have unlikely been able to come up with that unless we had all of this data collected and made it possible to analyze that all in one place. Same's true for just about any area. We have one customer production company that did the same. They pulled that data, pulled that into Quick Launch, started analyzing that, and their production process, they were able to identify some key factors that once they modified that, they were able to achieve over $8 million to their bottom line in the first year, and even more in subsequent years. That's because they had all the data in one place. They were able to analyze it and start doing more advanced analytic capability to provide those kinds of optimizations that are very difficult to do unless you have all that data into a very efficient and structured data model. Okay, so whether it's a more focused area like we're looking at here, which specifically has to do with manufacturing, same would be true if you extend that throughout any other area of your production chain. So demand, supply, your sales detail, all of the above can then be easily analyzed so that you can really optimize across your entire supply chain. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of what that supply chain world looks like in a JD Edwards environment. What we have learned, certainly some of that experience is mine prior to joining Preferred, but the same's been true with many customers as we have worked with them. One of the biggest solutions that we've been able to bring together has to do with supply and demand planning and having visibility across that in a JD Edwards environment. So I'm going to switch over now to just do a quick live demo and give you a sense for first what Quick Launch looks like out of the box, but more importantly, how does that then expand to supply and demand. So what you see here is a demo environment of Quick Launch in Power BI. This is a JD Edwards set of sample data, and it's pulling information across JD Edwards as well as related sources to bring together a holistic view in Power BI. Now, this is a sales version of this. We've got equivalents for just about any area on the finance side. The same would be true for all of your financial reporting, whether that's corporate dashboards, KPIs, all the metrics that really come into play with any organization. And out of the box, you'll see something like this, and that will extend to inventory, purchase orders, work orders. In fact, just to give you a quick glimpse of what that looks like and how that all fits together, the Quick Launch JD Edwards capability extends to a very long list of perspectives that include data from all of your key sources of data across your JD Edwards environment. So that means that it's literally thousands of relationships, thousands of metrics, and just a long list of tables that all have relationships that are critical to understanding your data and bringing it into the same model. We may be only interested in what's related to supply chain. So if we look at just inventory, maybe we also want to include purchase orders, perhaps add to that work order detail. You start to get the picture of how all of this data is coming together and how that makes it possible to very quickly begin to use a supply and demand solution that includes all of these different data sources. Now, you've got the full data lineage. You can see that over on the right-hand side, but you can also begin to see all the relationships that come into play, whether that's looking at the entire superset of perspectives from every module across JD Edwards, or just what you want to focus on. Now, as a self-service end user, you certainly wouldn't need to know any of that. The fact that all that is happening behind the scenes and is doing so with whatever refresh frequency you decide makes the most sense, then makes it possible for us to have that holistic view that can be any form of our out-of-the-box solutions, whether that's inventory related or any other area we want to focus on. But more importantly for this discussion, what does that mean in terms of supply and demand? So we've got a set of sample data here. Again, this sample data is geared around JD Edwards, but it could be pulling from other data sources that support that. In this case, we're looking at how do we have an exception-driven view of what we anticipate in terms of problems. So those problems can take many forms, but let's just look at simple inventory availability. We could build with self-service point and click. We could build anticipating problems in any other area. We could do that. So with our materials, with our allocations, take your pick. We'll use the product availability as our example here. And you can see in this case, this is manufacturing, food manufacturing that makes a number of different products here. Fictitious data, obviously, but we've got a number of different items that we see across a series of dates that are suddenly exception based. So we're getting notification here because there's going to be an availability shortage. Now you can see here some of the numbers may be higher than others. If I look out at the future week on this, lemon bars, for example, we've got a huge shortage of availability. Maybe that doesn't matter so much because I can substitute and I've got plenty of substitution, but I've got a margarita flavor that I know I've promised and over allocated. So, and of course we don't want to do without margarita. So what's behind that? What is driving that? Now, before I start drilling down into the detail, just want to point out here too that we've got a lot of capability here to filter based on what is most important to me. So for example, not just dates, but looking here at stocking types. We may only want to focus in on our finished goods stocking types. That may be the real big focus for us. We may also want to look at bill of materials or componentized. We may want to look at our WIP or work order detail. We can filter on any of that at any time. Same's true for our master planning family, or frankly, any attribute that we want to pull in, and it's drag and drop to be able to pull that in, as well as an item specific. As a supply planner, maybe there's a certain number of supply or rather items I'm responsible for, and being able to filter on that so I can see what's driving any kind of future availability issues and do so in advance. Now, as we look at the left-hand side here, we've got additional filtering capability. Right now, I'm looking at availability, and it includes a handful of inventory types, on hand, sales orders, work orders, etc. Maybe I don't want all of those included and want to see a view of that in a little different way. For example, maybe my WIP process ultimately doesn't have any kind of reliability in terms of availability, or maybe the way we're currently using JD Edwards, it shows as available at a time where we think it won't be available. Well, I can simply deselect that. That's going to dynamically change our values across all of our availability metrics that are indicating where we're going to have issues. Maybe I want to include or not include safety stock in that calculation, depending on how you treat safety stock and what that means to you in terms of product availability. You may want to toggle that on or off, no problem. Same's true with branch plants. If you want to focus on a specific branch plant or multiple branch plants, your filtering capability is dynamic. You can do it on the fly and see the net effect right in front of you. So if I look at this now and say, okay, well, let's focus on that shortage here on margaritas. And you can see over on the right-hand side that will perpetuate to get us to the breakdown of each of the line items that roll up into that availability. So the 1624, if I want to then drill down into the subsequent detail, I can then go right to the sales order details. So what's really driving that availability shortage? Let me take a look at the sales order detail below that. Same true for purchase orders. Do we have an issue where those purchase orders are now delayed? Where we've got material shortages, where we've got maybe we're using a third party for our production. What's behind the availability issues? Or simply look at the inventory detail to see the inventory detail in full and holistic view of that, as well as anything related to work orders. So all that drill down functionality, and again, this is just one of many ways that you may need to look at your business, but it gives you a real sense for what is possible in terms of drilling down into each one of the subsequent levels. if I drill down into the inventory detail, I get a full picture of the sample data, obviously just as a handful of data points here, but everything from on hand and what's currently available, everything that is ahead, what's committed, what's back ordered, what's maybe on hold for inspection, what's in transit. In transit can be even broken down into the different categories we may use. So you see a full view of that inventory for that specific item to be able to drill down into the detail. Same be true for any other area where we wanted to drill down. So maybe we wanted to see what's behind the sales orders on this lemon bar, huge lack of availability that is ahead. And we see the breakdown here, where that availability is going to be affected. We see where those sales orders are coming in and the source of that. We could even have a subsequent drill down into that that may be broken down on allocated versus non-allocated, and the list goes on. Now, finally, as we're looking at this, you may be wondering, like, what's behind the data here. So just a real quick look, and I won't go into the detail here, but you can see if we go into an edit mode, you can see the long list of data points across our entire JD Edwards environment, as well as anything related to it. Now, it may be supply and demand directly, or it may be indirect data sources we want to pull in. It could be something outside of that, whether it's a demand planning solution, shop floor production details, consumer complaints that are product specific. Any of that data, then we can simply drag and drop, and the relationships are already built and correlated for us. Okay, so that's a real quick walkthrough for our supply and demand solution, with a really simple version of how that data can be pulled together and then dynamically generated into an exception-based, but more importantly, end-to-end visibility across your entire supply chain, to really answer the right kind of questions in real time or near real time, so that you can make the right kind of proactive decisions at any point. And same would be true across the entire organization. So hopefully that demo was useful and gives you a little bit of sense for what's possible in terms of modernizing the JD Edwards supply chain ecosystem. I'll pause there and turn it back over to David. I think we've got some time now for any Q&A if we've had any questions that have come in. But again, thanks very much to everyone for joining today.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Todd, for a great session. We had a couple questions come in. The first one was, I have quite a bit of data cleanup needed. Should I complete that cleanup before trying to put a supply and demand solution in place?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think probably one that you often face in JD Edwards alone, but especially so if you start integrating other data sources. Our integration and implementation process includes some of that, where we're trying to help sort through hierarchies and the conform dimensions that result from that overall implementation. But the reality is, there's always going to be some mismatch, some data cleanup that's inconsistent. When I was starting this journey at Cliff Bar, I asked the question, how many brands do we have? So a really basic dimension, and as many hands that went up, that many answers were different. And that's not uncommon, especially when you're relying on Excel and using hidden tabs or VLOOKUPs or anything of that nature. It becomes a data cleanup exercise for sure. What I would say is, we found implementing from our JD Edwards source system to start made it much easier to complete all of that data cleanup. For example, as we were introducing our demand planning system, we conformed to that data model that was JD Edwards driven. The integrity constraints then were there from the start. as we were looking at older systems and did the same, the consumer complaint, for example, that had a very different view of the world because it was consumer facing, not production facing. And so having that conformed data model as a starting point made it much easier for us to clean up that data. And then as we were doing so, we already had a tool in front of us that made it easy to validate that cleanup. So I would say that, yeah, the data cleanup is critical, but it can happen concurrently, and there's lots of benefits to doing so.
Okay, great, thanks. That makes sense. The next question we had here was can I refresh my supply and demand data in real time?
Yeah, great question as well. So I've used the word real time, probably several times during this presentation. Let me just clarify what that means from a quick launch perspective, and then outside of quick launch, what that can look like in your environment. I would often describe what we were accomplishing, and even to some of our preferred strategies customers, as better than real time. And what I mean by that is anytime you have multiple data sets, frankly, it could just be JD Edwards, but anytime you have multiple data sets, the amount of effort and time it takes to go in real time, open your interface, pull that data, extract it into a CSV, let's say, pull that into your spreadsheet. Even if you got macros that do some of the work for you, by the time you're done, it's going to take a reasonable amount of time. Instead, what we're doing from an automated perspective with the automated pipelines, we're pushing that data from the source systems to the data model in a variety of ways, but always with a defined frequency. Sometimes that's once a day, and that works just fine. Sometimes that's once an hour, and that works just fine. The interval is really up to you. We're also building a baseline of all data, but from that point on, we're only including the new data. So we're doing incremental refreshes. That incremental process means it's just what's changed. And sometimes that's a very small set of data. Sometimes that can be large. If you've just completed a sales update job in your JD Edwards environment, that may have affected quite a number of rows. May have affected your inventory master with most records. So that those incrementals maybe are a bit larger. But by doing so in an incremental way, you get a really high degree of performance in terms of that upgrade, in terms of that updating to that data model. So from a quick launch perspective, that's our approach. The reality is, in some instances, and we were looking at the example of a shop floor manufacturing environment, you may want that even higher refresh rate. We were refreshing at a 30-second interval, which on a shop floor, it would be impossible for somebody to go and get to that data in 30 seconds or less if they were looking that up in any other way. So that, again, an example of it being better than real time. But we weren't pulling in every data point across every piece of equipment across the entire manufacturing floor and storing that data. So we had to really optimize the flow of that data so that we could effectively stream it, even though it was technically a 30-second refresh. We could stream that. Power BI, in addition to the refresh capability that can be optimized through partitions and the way you structure and design your data model refreshes, can be optimized to be high level of frequency. You could even create separate models representative of different needs. But ultimately, Power BI also has evolved and includes some streaming data capabilities. So if you think about IoT devices, PLC connectivity, you may have a higher refresh frequency that technically is not what I would say real time, because real time would be opening the source system directly. But then again, a spreadsheet's never going to be real time either. And in fact, the refresh rate can be, like I said, better than real time because automating those workflows from multiple systems gives you a data model that represents your end-to-end picture. So probably a little more information than was asked in the question, but the
No,
reality is it is not easy to connect to and integrate multiple data sources. And we've worked hard to try to make that as easy as possible.
yeah, no, that was a great explanation, Todd. I think real time is always an interesting concept when it comes to data. So thank you for that. And that is all the questions I see here. So with that, we did have a couple of people ask if the recording was going to be made available. And yes, we will follow up with you with a link to the recording, as well as a link to some interactive supply and demand product tours that we have, in case you want to get your hands on it a little bit more. So thanks again, Todd, for the presentation today, and thanks everybody for taking the time to join. And we look forward to seeing you on the next education session.
Thanks, everyone.